I'm going with Texas. And here's my reason why.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of Matt's Madness. We're back at it, and today we have special guest Ariel Puterman joining the show. If I messed that up, I'm sorry. As always, Matt is in the building or his apartment down there in the Rock. What's up, guys? How y'all doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Excited to talk about some college basketball. We're almost at March Madness. We're about a month away, so can't complain.
It's creeping up, Matt. How you doing, bro?
Yeah, I'm doing good. This is like my favorite time of the week, being able to do the podcast. So I'm always doing good for this.
I love it. All right, so we're going to kick off the show with the ACC and specifically bubble teams in the conference with the best chance to get into the tournament come March. And we're almost there. So give me your guys' teams that you guys think can make it into the tournament come March. We'll start with Matt.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with the recency bias here, and that's Virginia after that big buzzer beater 3 that Reese Beekman hit against Duke. And the reason I'm going with Virginia is not just because of that win versus Duke. Now, a couple of the teams in the ACC that are so on the bubble have actually gotten wins over Duke. We saw earlier in the year, you saw a Miami team that earned a big time win over Duke. I think that's kind of put the Hurricanes sort of in. I'm not even considering the Hurricanes on the bubble. I've got them in my Maddie brackets in the tournament right now. I think they've done enough. Then you see Florida State, another team that beat Duke, although they've kind of lost. They've gone on a little bit of a losing streak. But I think Florida State is still enough on the bubble where I'm not crossing them off yet. I'm just not picking them for this exercise. But when I look at Virginia, I see, first off, you start with the coach in Coach Tony Bennett. And anytime there's a big-time program that's made it in the past and a coach like him, I think the committee is going to find a way to argue that team into the NCAA tournament. So I think that gives Virginia one extra point. You look at that loss to Navy in Game 1, don't think that's looking as bad because Navy is a team that right now is competing for the Patriot League bid. And anytime a team is like top 1, top 2 competing for any mid-major conference, I don't think a loss like that is as bad as when it first appeared. And then obviously that 20-point loss to Houston. I mean, you see what Houston's done with a 20-win season already. So I look at Virginia now after the fact, and another win stands out in that Providence win that they got earlier in the season. Because now we see Providence ranked 11th in the country, and people are starting to look at that almost as big of a win as over Duke. So, I see 2 big-time wins that Virginia's gotten, and I think in a year where the bubble is kind of so weak this season, I think wins like that stand out. And on top of that, Virginia's already at 15 wins, which is a lot more than most teams on the bubble.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Virginia has a case, especially after that Duke win, but I'm going to go with UNC here. Yes, they are 0-7 in Quad 1, which is really bad. I don't think anyone can argue that. But they are 3-0 in Quad 2, and the committee looks at 2 things. They look at resume, and they look at analytics. When you look at Ken Pom and net, 2 of the things that they really evaluate, UNC is 47th in Ken Pom and 42nd in net. Virginia is 76th in Ken Pom and 80 in net. So there's clearly a huge gap. And like you said, it's the big name bias. UNC is one of the most historic programs of all time. Mm-hmm. If UNC is on the bubble, they're going to find a way to make that tournament, even if maybe they don't deserve it. They still have that game against Duke at Cameron Indoor. Yes, they got destroyed at home. But when the implications are that high, they're going to know how much that game matters. Coach K's final game, I think, even if they don't win, I still think they can win a few games in the conference tournament and sneak their way in. I just don't see a team like FSU, who's also in the bubble. They just lost their best player, Malik Osborne, and their ratings aren't too high. Syracuse, they're also 0-5 in Q1, pretty low on the Ken Pom and the net. And then Virginia, like I just mentioned, I think Wake Forest and Miami they're kind of on the bubble, but they're in right now, and then Duke's obviously going to make it. But I just don't see a scenario where the ACC only has 3 teams. I think they're going to find a way to sneak one in, and I think that's going to be UNC.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing to me is that there's no way that the ACC only gets 3 teams in. We're not talking about the Pac-12 from a few years ago. We're talking about an ACC where the committee always shows bias to the ACC, whether you like it or not. I'm not saying that the Pac-12 only deserves to get, the few teams that they normally do. I'm saying that, unfortunately, even though it's called Power 6, it ends up being, the ACC has a little bit of a curve graded to it. Ariel, to your point, though, I just look at North Carolina and I see the 29-point loss to Kentucky. Now, I know that game was scheduled on the fly. I'll give you that. I don't want to hold that in that much light either, but that is a pretty big loss. And then obviously you mentioned 0-7 in the quad one games, but they're really not winning these games and they're losing them by big amounts. I mean, you're talking about at Miami by 28, at Wake Forest by 18, and at home versus Duke by 20. So I look at more like the result as a whole, and I don't know. I just see that Virginia's 2 wins. North Carolina doesn't even have one of those. And in the games that North Carolina's had chances in, they've gotten blown out.
Yeah, you can't argue that. But I'm gonna be the little analytics nerd here. And if you just look at the Ken Palm, the net, they're almost double. Virginia's almost double in both. I mean, 42 in net compared to 80 in net, 47 Ken Palm, 76. And these guys really value it. In the last couple of years, we've seen them more and more, especially since the mid majors. They've been trying to get those in a little bit more. And the only way to really evaluate those is through the analytics. So I think they find a way just because of the analytics. They'll still have opportunities to get those quad one wins. And the ACC, it's obviously a down year for them, but they do have a few teams that can compete and can look like good wins, those bubble teams, and Miami, Wake Forest. So I think UNC will somehow find a way. They're one of like the most historic programs. Last year, Duke not making it was like a rare exception where a team was on the bubble and they couldn't make it, but they also had the COVID issues, so we don't know if that was a part of it. But Hubert Davis in his first year, obviously a down year, but they do have a lot of talent on the team. They have Armando Baycott, who's been great. Dawson Garcia, if he's healthy, Brady Manick, Caleb Love, all those guys. I think they'll find a way to win those big games when it matters and sneak their way into the tournament.
All right. Good answers, guys. Moving on to the second topic of the day. This one's my personal favorite. Who is the most overrated team in the country? And I know, Ariel, you just talked, but I'll toss this one to you first, and we'll have Matt rebuttal.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Houston. Maybe it's a popular overrated team, but I still think it's not talked about enough. They're number 6 in the AP top 25. They're 20-2. They have good analytics, but their best one's against Oregon. And I barely think Oregon's a bubble team, let alone a team that should make the tournament. I know they're the 8th seed in the most recent Maddie brackets. Check it out after the podcast. But I mean, when your best wins an 8 seed, how should this team be a top 2 seed? Yes, it's not their fault. They're playing in a horrible conference. Memphis has obviously been a lot worse than people expected. Wichita State's having a down year. But still, I don't know why we're rewarding a team for playing bad when they're playing bad teams, when there's teams like the Big 12, there's the SEC. We're picking up these big wins and they're not jumping ahead of them just because Houston keeps beating the bad teams. I think that Houston, if they take on a good team in the second round, they can lose by 15, 20 points. And I just feel bad for those guys who aren't watching college basketball who might be like, this is a 2 seed, they're 20-2. I'm going to take them to go far. And then they end up pretty low on the upset list.
To be fair, I feel like people weren't high on Houston last year. Make that run, but I'll give you a point. They did lose some of their best players,
they did
to injury. So, and then after last year too. So that honestly, Ariel, I can't argue with that too much. But I'm just gonna go with Illinois. It's tough because obviously they were without Kofi Coburn in the beginning of the season, and that's really why they lost that game at Marquette. So we could be looking at an 18-4 Illinois team with a win over another great opponent. And maybe I wouldn't even be having this discussion, but I'm not basing it off of that. I'm not basing it off the 20-point loss against Cincinnati, who might not even make the NCAA tournament. I'm not going on that. What I'm going at is the Big Ten schedule. And a lot of people are looking at Illinois right now saying, okay, this team is right up there, right next to Purdue. I just don't see that. I think they're that level below, near that Michigan State, maybe even of Wisconsin. And here's my reasoning. Their first real tough game of the season on MLK Day against Purdue, take the Boilermakers to double overtime. And in that game, I think everyone was ready to say, okay, even though Illinois didn't win, they're right there. This is the team that we thought when Kofi Coburn announced that he'd be returning. Since then, they've picked up a couple big wins, but I feel like all of a sudden people are elevating Illinois to this sort of, place above all these other teams where people are like, all right, the Fighting Illini are there. The Fighting Illini are there. All right, first off, you're in the Big Ten. You got a quadrant 1 chance at a win every single week because of how deep this conference is and because of how many teams are in the conference. What are those wins? Home against Michigan State, home against Wisconsin. What do they have coming up next? They got at Purdue. You already lost at home to Purdue. Now you have at Purdue. That's tonight at 9 p.m. Then you go to the rack a couple days later at Rutgers. We already know what Rutgers has been able to do at home. They knocked off Michigan State and they knocked off Purdue. What's stopping them from knocking off Illinois? And then they go at Michigan State. Again, Illinois 1-1 at home versus Michigan State. Going to be a different story at the Breslin Center. And then they go at home against Ohio State, who, in my opinion, Ohio State is right up there in the Purdue territory. They just have been unfortunate and haven't played as many games so far because of a couple cancellations and whatnot and just the way the schedule worked. So, and then they go at Michigan as well. I don't want to talk too much about the Wolverines, but anytime you play at Michigan, that's also a tough place to play. So all of that summed down, I think that right now Illinois' top half of the schedule has been as favorable as it can get in the Big Ten. I'm waiting to see how they do through the rest of their schedule in February and in the beginning of March.
Yeah, I'm going to circle back to Houston before I talk about Illinois. I think the big reason why they made the Final Four last year is because they got extremely lucky. I mean, Illinois got upset by Loyola Chicago. West Virginia got upset by Syracuse. Oklahoma State got upset by Oregon State. So I think they're one of the first teams ever to make the Elite Eight without playing a single-digit seed. Then they played Baylor and got destroyed. I mean, Baylor was good, but still. So I think maybe they're following a similar trajectory, and they don't have Marcus Sasser this year, who's their best player. So that's not going to favor too well. And about Illinois, I think you can argue that, but I also think Corbello hasn't really been on the team too much. And once he comes back healthy, we saw he had a concussion. He missed a lot of time. Then he was stuck in health and safety protocols for a while. When he gets back in the rotation, they can start playing as a full team again. I think that they'll perform just to the expectations they were playing. I mean, I already think they're doing a pretty good job of that, but they'll just be elevated. Kofi's obviously probably the most unguardable player in the country, him or Oscar Tshiebwe. And then you add guys like Alfonso Plummer, who's really stepped up this year. Trent Frazier's been solid. And then just the overall leadership of Curbelo. We've seen how important a true point guard is in college. Teams like Duke without Jeremy Roach, he hasn't really been the guy. And a couple other teams have really, like Memphis especially, not having that true point guard really has hurt them. And Curbelo can be that true point guard. I think that once he's back in the rotation fully, you get a few games with him, they'll be a completely different team, and they'll definitely live up to those top 3 Big Ten expectations.
Yeah, and I think all that you said is true. I mean, I don't want to doubt any of that. Again, I think Houston is an overrated team. I mean, for a reason, I have them as a 3 seed in the tournament, even though they're 6th in the country. I mean, you look at that, you figure 2 seeds, that should go up to, all the 1 seeds are the top 4, 2 seeds are 5 through 8. I have Houston, I believe I put them as the 2nd 3 seed. So that's like the 10th team on my seed list. Illinois, again, I see your points. I'm just waiting over these final 8 games because when I see at Purdue, again, should be a win versus Northwestern and a win versus Penn State, I still think Iowa can be a challenge, even though it's at Illinois, because you never know what Keegan Murray can provide on any single night. But those games on the road against Rutgers, Purdue, Michigan State, Michigan, and then any home contest against the Buckeyes, I wouldn't be surprised if Illinois only goes like 5-3 through those next 8. And all of a sudden we're talking about an Illinois team that's 20-8 and maybe a little bit more how we thought they'd be, or at least how I thought they'd be. I know a lot of people have been high on them. I just feel like when you lose a player like Ayo Dosunmu, it's not going to be easy to reciprocate that the next season.
Okay, love it. So let's switch it. Matt, fill in the blank. The most underrated team in the nation is?
The most underrated team in the nation.
Underrated.
Gosh, we were talking about this before, and I was going with Belmont, and then I was just like, all right, I have a revelation. I'm not going with Belmont anymore. I'm going with a team that a lot of people might say is overrated. And Ariel, again, not recency bias, not to like, I don't want to make you or Talha here because I've learned some information before the show. I'm not trying to create nightmares. I'm going with Texas. And here's my reason why. A lot of people, I think, are starting to call off the Longhorns after their slow start to the season. I was one of them. I'll raise my hand right there. I thought that the Longhorns maybe weren't going to be as good as people projected them to be. And maybe this is just the circle of following Texas basketball. It starts at the top, then all of a sudden they disappoint, and then you say, well, maybe Texas can be how we expect them to be, and then it goes all the way around to the other side of the circle. But first off, one of their 6 losses is on the road against Gonzaga in a 12-point game. And I know that it was more than that. They cut it to 12 at the end. But let's just talk about the fact that they played Gonzaga in November. I mean, that's just like, that's a win in itself, the fact that you're willing to do that. And I think what you forget is, in this age of transfers, Texas has probably had it as hard as anyone because they've had so many transfers that they've had to get to play together and a new coach on top of that. So not only do you have a new system, but you have a bunch of new players trying to figure out this new system and get used to life as a Texas Longhorn. And I think that there were some struggles with that. Obviously, the close loss to Seton Hall, the loss to Oklahoma State, Iowa State. I wouldn't say that any of those games were, games that you'd expect the Longhorns to lose. But I think given they're all on the road, you can't say that it was unconceivable. I mean, those are still against, competent teams. But now I see the Longhorns kind of turning it up. I mean, you look at 3 of their last 4 games. First off, their last 4 games have all been against ranked opponents, but a win over Tennessee. It's tough to play a non-conference team in the middle of the conference schedule. So to get that win over another ranked team is big time. A loss to Texas Tech. I don't think you can dispute that Texas Tech is a great team, so I'm not going to discount the Longhorns there. And then the wins over Iowa State, who I think is becoming overrated, although they've had a tough road as well. And then the win against your Jayhawks, and now they go on the road against Baylor coming up next. So that's going to tell it all. If this Texas team can beat Baylor on Saturday, that's going to be big time. But right now, I mean, as I look at these last 4 games, I'm saying, okay, it seems like maybe Texas is starting to figure it out. I think the offense still needs to get better, but they're at least finding a way to win. And at the beginning of the season, especially the beginning of that Big 12 schedule, it seemed like Texas was going to have trouble making the NCAA tournament. Now, I think they're certainly in, and they're pushing back up to try to get into that top 4 seed line.
Go ahead, Ariel.
You're really tugging at my heartstrings here after the heartbreaker yesterday as a Kansas Jayhawks student. But, I have to slightly agree with you. I think their biggest problem in the beginning of the season was that they were playing through their guard because, Andrew Jones, Courtney Ramey, 2 great guards, but it wasn't working. And then Chris Beard kind of shifted that to playing through Timmy Allen, playing through Christian Bishop, and that's worked so much better. It's made Marcus Carr more comfortable on offense. It's given the guards more opportunities, and they've been able to take advantage of mismatches, which I like. My question for them is their ceiling. Yes, they beat Kansas at home and Tennessee, but can they win a neutral game against a team like that? They barely beat Kansas. They went on a 7-0 run in the last minute. Tennessee, they kind of controlled throughout, but Tennessee went on a big run at the end of the game in their own home court. They still haven't gone that signature road win yet. So I'm kind of worried about them still. I think they're properly rated. I don't see them going farther than the Sweet 16, but time will tell with that. My underrated team, I don't know if you can really call them underrated, so I kind of came up with 2. It's another Big 12 team. It's Texas Tech. And, they're number 9 in the country, so I don't know how you can call them underrated. But if you had to pick a winner right now, I think I'd take Texas Tech. They're the number 2 defense in Ken Palm. They have a great offense. They have a lot of really talented players if they can stay healthy. They got Terrence Shannon. They got Kevin McCullough. Bryson Williams has really stepped up this year, the transfer from UTEP. Adonis Arms has taken an extended role. And I think a great, we see every championship team, they have a great offense, great defense. We saw with Baylor last year. And I think that they have all the tools they need to win a championship, even though, it might be the Auburn, Gonzaga. You might even see like Baylor and Kansas above them, but in my Big 12 power rankings, I've stuck with Texas Tech at number 1, even throughout all these rankings where they've been the 2nd or 3rd team ranked in the Big 12. And then I'm going to give another mid-major one. I'm going to give it to South Dakota State. A lot of people might not have heard of them. The big team in the conference is Oral Roberts after their Sweet 16 run last year. But the Jackrabbits are 21-4, and they're 2nd in the country in scoring. They're averaging 87 points a game. The only team above them right now is Gonzaga. And I think that they should deserve more love. We hear about the big mid-majors. We hear about Murray State this year. Colorado State, Wyoming have gotten a lot of attention recently. But South Dakota really deserves it. They're scoring a lot, and we've seen teams who just outscore the other, especially at the mid-major level, take down those higher seeds in March. We've seen the 4-13, the 5-12 every single year, and I think this team is more than capable of that. And if they can continue to score at this level, then who knows how far they can go. I don't see them as an Elite 8 team by any means, but Sweet 16 is not out of the question for this team. I think they should be in the same conversation as these Murray State, Wyoming, Fresno State, Ohio, these kind of teams.
Yeah, first off, Baylor Shireman on South Dakota State. He's a great player. They got Noah Friedel. obviously a couple of years ago, you did that interview with Mike Daum. I mean, we know that the South Dakota State program is at least big enough to compete on that level because they've had some pretty good scores in the past. So I think you're totally right there. I think you're totally right in them as an underrated mid-major team. I'm going to come back to this Texas Tech thing just for a moment because, again, I agree that the Red Raiders are right there. It just surprised me when you said that they were going to maybe win the whole thing. But then when I think about it, they're one of the hottest teams in the country, and they're already a top 10 team. So I guess I can't doubt that. I also doubted them before when everyone was on their bandwagon a few years ago. And what did they do? They went to the national championship game and shut me up like that. So maybe I should stop. I should stop. I should apologize to the city of Lubbock because
Cut it out.
Some pain.
Yes, apologize right now. They're watching.
Sorry, but I want to go back to my Texas comments because you said that they might not be able to make the Sweet 16, and all of a sudden, I'm highly doubting that they get out of the first round if I go by my bracket right here because I have Texas matched up in a 6-11 matchup against Colorado State. I'm not sure if they get past David Roddy and the Colorado State Rams if Colorado State is fortunate enough to get into the tournament. And who do I have Texas going up against if they make it past that round? Illinois. So I didn't do this on purpose, but it definitely fits well for the episode. I will say that obviously Texas's win over Kansas, I think, even though it's so easy to pick up a lot of big wins against ranked teams at this point in the season, I'll probably bump them up to a 5, which would put them into a first-round matchup against Chattanooga. Still tough, but I think they'd win that, and then they'd play UCLA in the next round. I think Texas would win that as the Bruins are really folding right now, but it's a long ways until that discussion. I just thought that was interesting because I really didn't plan that at all.
Yeah, and I think they have a top 3 hardest schedule in the country the rest of the season. I know they have to play Kansas on the road. They got Baylor twice. They got Texas Tech at home. I believe they already finished with Iowa. But I mean, the Big 12 is just so hard in general that every game's a quality game. So it really comes down to if they can win those games, especially those 2 Baylor games. If they can pick up that home win against Baylor or Texas Tech, we all know the animosity between the 2 teams. One of the best college environments, that Texas Tech-Texas game. We'll see if Texas can return the favor, even though it's obviously not as big for them, but they can kind of feel it. So each game matters, as for every team, but I think especially for Texas, they want to get into those higher seeds because I think the difference between a 4 and a 6 is huge this year since there's so many good mid-majors. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to be that 6-11 matchup because any 11 can win this year, even any 13 can win this year, but especially those 11, 10, 12 seeds.
I know it's a topic for hopefully another episode, but like normally, there might be one mid-major because obviously typically the first 4 in are 12 seeds, right? Sometimes it's 12 seeds and an 11 seed. Recently, it hasn't been both 11 seeds. It's really been pushing towards both 12 seeds. But I think you can argue that Iona is big enough to go above the seed line for the first 4 games. I think Chattanooga is right there because the SoCon's such a great conference and they're 20-5. New Mexico State has a good chance at doing that. UAB, if you look at the metrics, Ohio. I mean, a lot of these teams I've still kept on the 13 line, but you could all argue it. And if most of these teams run the table, it's going to be tough keeping them below that 12 seed line. And you've already got teams like Murray State and Davidson that will no doubt be above that 12 seed line. So yeah, it's going to be tough. If you're playing one of those 13 seeds or nothing, like this year, you better hope you're playing a 14 seed or worse. And even then, as we saw last year, it might not matter.
It's going to be fun watching it, guys, going down the line as March comes, and we're almost there. But all right, guys, awesome stuff today from the both of you. Ariel, thanks for joining us. Nice meeting you, bro. Go Jayhawks. And that's a wrap, folks. We will see you back here for another editions of Matt's Madness. For the latest on college basketball, make sure to follow our socials at CBB Review on Twitter and on Insta. We'll see you guys next time.